It's really rare for intellectuals to be emotionally stable. Yes. It's a trade-off. To be an intellectual, you have to sacrifice a bit of your emotional stability. Yeah. It's very difficult to balance the two. You want to be emotionally stable enough to actively participate in intellectual seeking. And you can go back and forth. It's a dynamic. I'm not saying they're directly antagonistic to each other, but being an intellectual is extremely emotionally taxing. To be intellectual, you have to remain open-minded. It produces ambivalence, and when you're constantly open to new ideas, you're constantly reforming your ideas and entertaining ideas and making time for those ideas. When you close off a bit and you find, some clarity, emotional stability becomes much more consistent. You're not constantly saying, is this right? Is this wrong? Or like, this person says this is right, this place is... So whenever I express an idea, even with statistics, I try to push sort of an assertion that I've made adequate efforts. But if you're exercising intellectualness, you are trying to diminish your responsibility because you're often constantly asking, do you know enough? Do you have enough perspectives? So you're arbitrarily cutting off a requirement at the preservation of your emotional stability. You are trying to make yourself feel comfortable, prideful enough, heck, even arrogant enough to take a risk and boldly suggest or claim something. However, it's antagonistic to being an intellectual. An intellectual tends to constantly be self-challenging and open. Yes, it doesn't make people trust you. In the current trend of the internet and stuff, it doesn't exude confidence. It's not reassuring. It can be very overwhelming. So when you're making friends and stuff, intellectuals tend to gather in niche, closed-off communities because they alienate. Intellectuals tend to alienate those others who don't understand their emotional instability, the ambivalence that they tend to have all the time. And that ambivalence is not a good or a bad thing. It's a consequence of being an intellectual. So it's acceptable. I accept and have to understand that I'm always constantly not sure about things. And that can help you cope with the instability. Like, you never did enough. You didn't do enough research. Can I even be an expert in something? Did what I say hurt someone or confuse someone? Did I unintended do something that I didn't intend to do? That type of stuff constantly flares in the mind. So to provide clarity, you close yourself up and you believe in things. You start believing in things, seeking principles, moral standings, pride. That type of stuff helps stabilize your emotions. They're very protective qualities. So when someone's arrogant and narcissistic, but they're really good at what they're doing, that narcissism and arrogance and confidence promoted that excelling, hyper-focused achievements. Typically, when you start doubting and looking for other challenges and stuff, you dip on your focus. You're very collectively inclusive, but you only have so much time and so much capacity. So you become overwhelmed. You become overwhelmed and depressed. And when you think about most of the geniuses in the world that's post-history, they died very miserable. But it didn't mean they didn't find it really rewarding, that what they did, or found regrets or stuff. It's just, it's very hard to... I don't think human beings don't exclusively do one thing, right? Like, exclusively being intellectual. But when you're like bonkers, like super bonkers smart, right? Which Geniuses are like maybe born once every. True unbelievable pioneers are born like 1 in 10 million or something. Those individuals don't even have time to process that they have emotional stability. They just keep going. Emotional stability is not even enough. They don't even have time for that. So as a healthy human being, you balance that. You get to choose sometimes to be ignorant, which I encourage. If you're feeling overwhelmed or depressed, the first thing you tend to do is you step away and you simplify and know that you are taking care of yourself at the expense of needing to know what's right or what's wrong or collective. And for intellectual, that's one of the hardest lessons, in my opinion. If you are truly on the other end of the scale, stepping away and sleeping is an ordeal already. So if you don't like sleeping or being lazy, or lazy makes you not feel great inherently, when I mean inherently, I mean lazy can promote guilt. Guilt is not what I'm talking about. Inherently is more like I'm sleeping because I could be learning instead of sleeping. That type of thing. Or I could be learning, not practicing what I already know. I can be experiencing more things over and over again. That type of missed opportunity. So that would be the intellectual's bane. Intellectuals don't sleep because they have mania. And I have less frequent manic attacks for a while now, which is great. So I'm like quite healthier than I've ever been. But when I was 20s and stuff, I had mania every day. Like I rarely slept. It was horrendous. And generally speaking, it's not out of guilt or guilty pleasure. So a lot of times you might be thinking, oh, I stayed up too late. I was doing something for fun and it was really fun, but I neglected my sleep. I just couldn't sleep. I just had mania. Mania is, to describe what mania is I concern myself with things that I shouldn't be concerned with. And what I mean is, I should be concerned with them, but not right now. I can't turn it off. So when you need to go to sleep, that inability to have an off switch prevents you from sleeping properly. So it takes years to cultivate a way or a routine to just stop concerning with putting it on pause. So all the types of strategies I talk about hey, plan this tomorrow, plan today for tomorrow, and just tell yourself when you go to bed, it doesn't matter. You could forget everything, and tomorrow it's all written down already. So don't be afraid to forget. It's already done. So one of the biggest coping strategies that is encouraged to those who experience mania, even panic attacks, if you do, is to write something down and tell yourself you can't possibly do it wrong next time, because you've already done it. So when you go to bed, it's not, oh, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. What if I forget this? What if this is it? You've already written it down. Go to bed. Like, so it's different from people who are participating passively in guilty pleasures, like looking on your phone. Like looking on your phone is a passive activity that keeps people awake because it's in their current line of activity. The mania part of intellectual is concerning something that's accumulating your entire life. So it's not focused on the task at hand. Is the more you learn, the greater chance you'll have a panic attack and a mania, because you don't want to forget those things. And that's where the mania comes from. And that describes or attempts to describe someone who I would consider as an intellectual in an unhealthy way, which I've dealt with myself for a really long time. And I don't find it as a blessing in disguise. I find it more of a bane. It's amazing to see people say, oh, I'm gonna go to bed now, And then I asked the next day, it's like, what did you think about, like, when before you went to bed? It's like, oh no, I just went to bed. Like, that's great. That sounds like something I could learn, but I have this complex routine to try to learn to, like, think about sleep. In fact, I kind of do that literally. I think about sleeping when I go to bed. So I think about all the things I should be doing as I'm lying in bed. Like, the first thing I would do when I lie in bed is I literally think, breathe in, 1, 2, 3. Breathe out, 1, 2, 3. So I'm occupying my mind so that I'm focused on the task, so I don't suddenly have another thought, an intrusive thought. When I'm playing OSU though, it doesn't prevent the intrusive thought, unfortunately. So doing other tasks, we call them intrusive thoughts because they're unwelcomed. It's a bit of a contrast to distinguish between non-intrusive thoughts, which is thoughts that you like or thoughts that you welcomed voluntarily by habit, either by habit or subconsciously. So like wanting to watch your phone before you go to bed, and then this person doesn't go to bed until they watch their phone. That's a habit forming association. And personally, what is the word that I like here? There's a vocabulary word for this, and it's really wonderful. Vilify. Vilify is the word. Actually, let me see what the dictionary says to other people when they look up this word, so I can frame it properly. Vilify. Speak or write about it in an abusive, disparaging manner. So it's more like a diatribe or something. Like you're stigmatizing. That's a decent word too. So when it comes to screens, blue light, TikTok, YouTube, it's often vilified right now as an extreme compensation for the associated behavior, undesirable negative behavior with these types of activities. For example, I can't go to sleep. Oh, you must be on your phone. So yes, there's a really strong converging evidence, right, for that narrative. However, saying to put down the phone, it's like, how do you solve this problem? Are you going to get more sleep if you put down the phone? No. The answer is resounding no. I mean, you could go cold turkey and just muster a willpower that you want. That's not constructive, in my opinion. But it's being vilified because it's a hot take on the solution. The solution is to figure out what you're associating with your phone. So for example, lying down on the bed and becoming calm might be associated with your phone, which just happens to happen while you're lying down in bed as well. How do you dissociate or reassociate those things? And that type of approach is really complex. It's hard to test. So the idea of even having evidence or consistent scientific peer review of that type of thing is going to be way too difficult to demonstrate. So we're just going to thought experiment. These are thought experiments. One idea is to associate new things in its place, or you can even utilize that. So for example, if the cell phone makes you calm, you can dissociate it by being calm in different places and not your bed. So then you can reassociate yourself with your bed. And the idea about this approach is to reach a more complex understanding of these associations, because correlation is not causation, right? It accommodates all the outliers as well. When you're trying to interpret what the outliers, a lot of times, yes, you focus on the majority, but you also want to continue expanding its inclusiveness. So how do you explain calming sleeping with blue light exposure in cell phones? Well, vilifying and hot taking the association by coincidence doesn't accommodate that. The current narrative is, for example, don't look at your screen an hour or 2 hours, I don't know, before bed. It'll increase your sleep schedule. Yes and no, but it does require a lot of social experimentation. That's the reason why I say yes and no, is these are correlations, and I encourage individuals to take that information and put it to the test for their own self-care. That's what I'm saying. It is nice to have concrete experiments as a great starting place, but it doesn't substitute for personal growth and experimentation. Because I feel like I wouldn't be able to fall asleep in under an hour without listening to a show. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't explain the new contextual understanding. Like when I had mania, I listened to audiobooks. Like I legit try to find the most comfortable, compression-free thing I could put in my ear, and I would listen to an audiobook to go to bed. To just focus myself into the words, like listen to the person's voice, and it takes me away from equally intrusive or possibly overbearing intrusive other thing. So for example, I'm sure my friends are okay with this. They used to sleep with a box fan. Just there has to be a box fan. And when I mean a box fan, I mean there's no substitute. It has to be those box fans. Are you familiar with the classical, like, mass-produced box fan, Worm? Where you are? Do you have box fans? They're legit a square and a blade in it, and it's like all white and plastic. They're like very, very cheaply constructed, but the sound they make was very therapeutic. So it's kind of like that. Once we understand more and live as human beings with the ability to observe and test and collect data, I don't think it's the whole picture, but it's a starting place where, like, put your cell phones down, do this. Is it really the literal thing, or it is the mania that's happening, or the FOMO that's happening? What is the source? And often the ones that are suffering from, and they might not even be the majority. I'm not even sure if it's the majority. It's too hard to know because self-reporting is unreliable when it comes to the internet. The act of the phone, is it the psychological FOMO individuals that is keeping them from sleeping? That's why they're on their phones, and not actually the phone, right? So the difference is subtle, but knowing the whole process and where the source is gonna take many years, maybe even decades, because our environment is still changing. For example, I have never, like, to this day, I am in the period of my life that I am most exposed to blue lights, to LCDs, to cameras, to cell phones in bed and all that. And the driving force is less than when I was outside, walking around, doing experiments, walking in the sunlight. So in order to accommodate that, perhaps the driving force and more understanding of the process that's creating these associations would tell a bigger story, right? But man, I wouldn't want to take up as like a experimentalist, like someone who requires observational and controlled environments to try to discern something, it's a tough challenge. I wouldn't want to do it professionally. It's so spurious that mania is coming back. As an intellectual, it would drive me insane. And ironically, in a way, you have to be less of an intellectual to really want to tackle the answer for those psychological questions, because you want to hypothesize and go down a route instead of being stuck at step one, which is, what is the question? What are you trying to test? Where do you even go from there? As a biologist or geneticist who like operates on other model organisms, not humans, I know where to start, because even that is too spurious. Like, it causes me 5 to 7 years of anxiety because they're uncontrollable and unknowables. Those who tackle human questions like psychology and stuff, it actually kind of requires a bit of closed-mindedness to want to do that. Because from my stance, I don't want to come anywhere near relying on myself to be able to design an experiment and collect that type of spurious data. It's unbelievably daunting. And how do you overcome daunting mania and ambivalence, confidence, pride, and arrogance? That's how you overcome it. It's to protect yourself while providing clarity just enough to follow through. So going back to like Osu and maybe Rhythm Sprout as a rhythm game, the top people at the top, what are their inherent human conditions that are required to be up there? Narcissism, arrogance, confidence, and pride. And less of an intellectual. It doesn't mean when they stop playing Osu, they can forgo all that and become a different person. The task that the personality traits and stuff that they must enhance and train to get that point comes with hyperfocus, arrogance, self-centeredness. And those are the requirements. It's kind of like when people say, oh man, this super successful CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation is greedy. Like, well, yeah. What kind of personality do you think is required to be in a position like that? You know what I mean? So it's not the way individuals say it, it's like, oh man, I can't believe this person isn't a saint who gives money away and always think about the people. Can you reasonably pragmatically accrue that much wealth and do that without like dynamically shifting back and forth? Like, I'm not saying that person is always greedy, but when they are trying to make money, greed is the way. Like, you need a greed mindset to accrue wealth. Then you go into a spending mindset, right? Then you start spending and you're no longer greedy for that moment. So compartmentalizing a human being based on their current circumstance, it's reductive, but it's also less intellectual as well, but it helps clarity. So like, if I identify someone, it's like, you're suffering right now, you're very depressed. What I'm saying to you now is just in the now. In the future, all this stuff can be largely irrelevant, but you can make it relevant by seeing the value in it and retaining the value in it. So when you become depressed again, you have a prior experience and you actualized it. So you're not a human being compartmentalized by the here and now. However, that's not how we evaluate things a lot, because on the internet it's by impression. So things are static. All the information you have is this video. It's unchanged, it's immutable, it doesn't go back and just suddenly dynamically mutate into something else. You, as the beholder, can impart future value to something that's immutable, like facts. So when we talk about facts, when people talk about facts, they're not introducing facts. Like, what I mean is they're not reading off facts. They're actually talking about it. So they're interpreting it. So the interpretation will change. It's mutable. It's not transferable from the facts. You can have a lot of facts to strengthen your interpretation, but the interpretation is ultimately mutable, and it's cross-sectional. So in this very time, when I say things like yesterday, we had an OSU discussion, quite an in-depth OSU-related discussion. The idea is the things I said was predicated on a combination of the time I invested in collecting data, which is not comprehensive. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I was ever confident that my data collecting is comprehensive, but it reflects the here and now of my interpretation. And every time someone asks, so are you suggesting this? It's like, yes, I'm suggesting it knowing that I have ambivalence about it. And that is the true nature of being an intellectual, in my opinion. Whenever there's always a big but coming up. Like, the person might sound very intelligent, they're pervasive, and it's like, yeah, all this sounds great. But remember, I'm spinning a narrative to provide direction, and I found converging evidence for that narrative. You are well in your power to come up with another narrative with contrasting converging evidence in order to enrich the inclusiveness. So we were discussing about rhythm games, specifically OSU, how I was talking about the vast majority of individuals who play games that are mechanically inclined, which is kind of like this game, sort of. And when you occupy a position of great expertise, your perspective no longer reflects the majority. It's an inherent intrinsic trade-off. The better you become, the more out of touch you inherently become emotionally and possibly intellectually away from the bigger scope of things. You do not occupy that space anymore. So when someone says, oh, OSU players always ask for help, it's like, well, first of all, are you experienced? Are you an expert? Well, based on my inclination, that person is probably viewed as someone very high, and sure enough, they are very, very experienced. And it felt like I called them out on their narcissism or self-centeredness and arrogance, but I wanted to emphasize that you are entitled for that. You are deserving of that. You are in a position in the 99.9th percentile. However, you have to mutually respect that when you are in that position, you are treated differently. You are confirmed and you are exposed to experiences that aren't reflective of the majority. And even statistics and my own personal experience align that the vast majority of, OSU viewers come for a certain other thing. Like, you don't have time to interest yourself in that. If you are in the 99.9th percentile of something, you have no time to go around and data collect about what engages people. You're at the top. Like, you want to stay focused, right? If your goal and mentality is to be better, no time for that. And that's very understandable. So, yeah, I can call people who are narcissistic and arrogant in an endearing way, because that's the truth, in my opinion. That's the subjective truth based on how psychology works now, that I understand how psychology works now. So have you ever been called a narcissist? You got to ask yourself, is this person just insulting you, or really just stating something that you don't find pride in, but should really think about perhaps finding some pride in? If you were an expert, you would develop narcissism, because you are one of the best. It keeps imposter syndrome at bay. You want to know one of the biggest narcissists, fictional character or not? Just go read Sherlock. Anything about Sherlock Holmes. It comes with the cake. When you eat the cake, a bit of narcissism, arrogance, and self-confidence. Sure, it's vilified. People vilify this all the time, but it's also short-sighted to understand that you pragmatically am unlikely to reach a pinnacle of performance and skill without developing those personality traits. Possibly permanently, who knows? I don't believe in permanence when it comes to the malleability of people's personality. They just meet the requirements of their goal. How strongly do you want Osu? Well, how strongly do you want to be the best rhythm sprout player? You better start developing a bit of narcissism, self-confidence over time. It's a consequence of truly and utterly being engrossed into something. So when you think about like Elon Musk and stuff, I don't think Elon Musk was always like that. But man, you have to be somewhat like that to be in a position like that. So when people talk about, oh, all the CEOs are the same, or like all those rich, successful people are the same, it's like, yeah, they kind of are, but they're not permanently like that. It's sufficient and necessary. It's sufficient and maybe even necessary for the position. The idea is you got to look at the history of the person in the continuum. They don't, at least as an intellectual, a person who take pride in being intellectual, I believe the human is dynamic enough to be really greedy and mongering in order to fit the role of CEO, and then suddenly humble themselves and do a labor job at a grocery store. And staying an intellectual keeps those doors open. Like, legitimately, the first thing I wanted to do, like one of the things I wanted to do that humbled myself was, I went to college, but I kept doing outreach programs. Like I wanted, to do soup kitchen stuff. Like I wanted to go to underprivileged high schools and stuff. Like I thought my high school was insufficient when I was a kid because they weren't culturally diverse and whatnot. But man, the realistic, it's like it's beyond their control. So they did the best with their resources. Like humans do the best and live up appropriately to their resources. Usually for survival first, for self-survival. And going to underprivileged places, it's a humbling experience. And that's the whole like Chinese proverb, right? Humility, I don't know what an appropriate Chinese, but sprinkle something in about humility when you develop narcissism and arrogance at the peak of your life. Humility grounds and reminds one of their starting place, and that kind of thing is cool. At least I think. All that, I don't know where I was going with that, but it is that statement is really profound. And if you internalize that worm, the whole idea of being emotionally unstable associated with intellectual, you kind of learn to understand or get to choose if, hey, I'm feeling a bit confused. Am I over seeking for information, or am I confused in general? Like it's a great question and insight, in my opinion. I guess the code scanner for some mobile games was stood out. Oh wait, there's a code scanner for mobile games? I mean, they did that before, Mazuku. Sorry, that's a big digression, but I remember I missed one. Fake offers. I googled, they look like the ones you put in the, yeah, just a bigger box version. But yeah, my friend slept to the box fan, and you know what? When they had that box fan, I was fine with it too. Like that personality, it was amazing how I'll ask my, I'm gonna ask my friend on Wednesday. I'm curious what the box fan did for them. When I was talking to them about the box fan before, they said they like the hum, the consistency of the box fan to get them to rest. But I really want to ask them if because they had intrusive thoughts, or like what was the mechanical or the mental service of the fan. When I met them, that box fan helped. So like I took inspiration from being their roommates for 3 years, and things like that kept mania at bay for me. I mean, I didn't know that was the case when I was younger, so I'm kind of curious upon reflection what my best friends think about that as well, like that idea. It's difficult to really know when you don't know, right? So when I was younger, I tried to find, I didn't know, I was literally trying to find things to drown out my intrusive thoughts. And that's fair enough. And intrusive thoughts can be very, very dangerous, especially when you have a lack of self-control. So I think one of the biggest things that come out from intellectual is they often appear like they're always holding something back. And you might be thinking, a lot of times those who are less of intellectuals, like less intellectual scale, but more closed off and direct and foolhardy, like more arrogant and confident, they tend to be like, why do you always sound like you're hiding something? Or like you're not telling me the full truth or the full picture. And the idea really isn't because, in my opinion, to emphasize, it's not because we don't want to tell what's on our minds, or like what's on my mind, for example. It's just I can't sort it out. And do I really want to? And then you start considering all these other things, like, do I really want to burden you with these? Right? Do I really want to share all these thoughts? Like, do you want mania with me? Like, really ask yourself. And then the idea is that other person, for me as an intellectual, if I see another person who's closed-minded, who's very direct, very, very happy, and strong-willed and foolhardy, my first inclination is, if I share everything, are they healthy enough to stay in present while not feeling attacked, or like feeling like they're being opened up for exposure? And when I mean exposure, I don't mean exposure as in I'm calling them out, but more for weakness. So because often holding back is a coping mechanism, it's a protective measure. If you are an intellectual, you are obviously holding something back. If it looks like that person is always holding something back, it is also can be overlapped with someone who's legitimately maliciously hiding intent and whatnot. But technically, intellectuals are hiding intent too. So, but it's very difficult to understand if they are doing it as a form of coping or habit forming, or it's the idea you have to establish trust that this person has your best intentions in mind, your feelings in mind. However, a lot of times hiding something is vilified. When you hide something, it's a projection of self. So that other person who's closed-minded, who tends to be less than, the first thing they would consider is, you look like you're hiding something. So therefore it has to be for malicious intent, because I would be hiding something. If I had something to hide, it would be bad. So that's a projection of that person. An intellectual, when they say, you know, like, you seem like you're hiding something, is everything okay? That would be the first answer. That would be the first question. Like, is it all right if you share, or it's all right if you don't want to share? It could be very hard, like secretive, or you're not ready to share, and maybe there's a trust issue. So there's all these other things that come, and you do get a semblance of emotional stability on the outside, like the but that's from coping. That's from hiding what's going on in your mind. It's an exercise and practice. It's a gold standard, in my opinion, of hyper-functioning people. They hide things because they don't know for sure, and it's a way to cope with appearing emotionally unstable. The individuals that are more close-minded, like, and I'm not saying in a bad or good way, when you close off your mind, you become very focused, you understand what's right or wrong, what makes you feel good or bad, and it's on your sleeve. Like, it's out for display. So when you're happy, it's right there, because it's the thing you're not juggling. You're not juggling being sad and happy at the same time, or whether you are sad or happy or both and not, or bittersweet, or like that stuff. So what happens to filter this out as intellectuals, and they are the vast minority, this is my belief, I don't have evidence, but heightened hyper-functioning intellectuals are far rarer. And what do you do when you cope knowing that you are far rarer? You don't treat other people like yourself. Do not project yourself expecting that they will be able to empathize with you, because that's a recipe for more failures than success. You could take a leap of faith. A leap of faith is what I do sometimes, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to end up with my foot in my mouth all the time. Like, a leap of faith against your statistical well-being is an act of good faith, but it doesn't change the idea that someone will not be able to empathize with you statistically, right? You are unlikely to bump into them. So being able to understand what statistics, population statistics are, you can decide if you want to make that leap of faith. So all the things I say now, I'm saying it for my own personal deliberation, and I leave it to other people to interpret. And I can tell you, from ever since I started doing this, right, the deliberation of sharing the mania that's in my head, 3.5 years, how many people do you think resonated with me? Well, you can count the people here. It's not a lot. It's not a lot. So you have it, and I'm happy in a way that my perception of reality is accurate, but I'm also bittersweet about it, because it also means that I must continue to cope and behave appropriately. I won't tell you that a lot of things, and you have to be okay with it, because personally, I rather not attack your personal beliefs or inherently challenge your personal beliefs if I haven't earned your trust or feel that you are receptive to it. And yeah, to the other person, be like, well, you're making the decisions for me. It's like, yes, I am, in a way. But from time to time, I don't, and I do, and I don't, and I do. For someone who is closed off, there's only one way, or a few ways to be right about this, a few ways to be wrong about this. And for intellectual, that changes all the time. So if you ever meet someone who feels like their personality constantly changes over time, or they are constantly taking different stances, or constantly being a contrarian, you're probably talking to an intellectual, because they are awfully conflicted. They are extremely conflicted. And how do I cope with this? Trying to accept not knowing something. Work on not having to be the best. Work on trying to just be okay with things. The 80-20 rule was not something I was born with. It was something that resonated with me, that helped me have a healthy relationship with myself. Not finishing this game and grinding my brains out and treat this like Osu is going to save me from myself, or save me from myself that I don't want to entertain right now. So I can choose to grind this out. But right now, I can at least gauge, like, I don't want this that much, right? So knowing that your tendencies give you the power to prevent you and give you a little emotional stability, but practicing it is way harder if you inherently do something for a very long time. And for me, it was about knowing everything. I wanted to know everything. When I was younger, I just wanted to always be right. And now I'm singing a different tune. Personally, it's a lot of fun when I'm wrong because it gives someone the opportunity to tell me something and I don't have to do it. So if there's anything I've learned from being a hyper-functioning, idiotic know-it-all as a younger person, is that you can inherently make people feel good about themselves while all they're doing is helping you. Think about that for a moment. How do you get experts who are at the top of their game, who developed a sense of narcissism, arrogance, and self-confidence? How do you turn that into a win-win situation when you don't want to put in the effort? That's right. You can entertain their narcissism and arrogance, and it will help them get even better and enable them. And what do you get in return? You get all their knowledge and stuff compacted into a hot take for yourself. And you don't have to go somewhere else to do it. So it's a win-win. It's harmoniously interacting with someone. So yesterday was a great example of that, in my opinion. That's how I reflect on yesterday's comment. And this person knows that they're very good, but they're really hard on themselves. And I do see a struggling burning sun, like a literal burning sun. Like I watched today and I spectated. I hope this person gets some balance in their life, but as a way of communicating with this person, I catered to them because they are different. They are special. That's the idea. They are in the 99.9th percentile of proficiency in a singular task, and that's incredible. But I had to level them to understand that it might not feel like they're special because they're racking their brains and they're busting their butts to eke out like a 0.1% performance gain. And to ground that, I had to empathize with that and also reinforce the idea that everything I'm saying is in contrast to what they experience, but at the same time, I'm complimenting them because it is true. They are extraordinary. You do not have a reflective experience. You cannot be an expert and extraordinary and still retain wholeheartedly a reflection of the majority. It's a trade-off. If you are super special and you're a genius, you're going to feel alone. And then when you tell people what your opinions are by your own experience, instead of relying on other people's data collection, when you are extraordinary and you do not rely on data collection, empirical observations, anything you say from your life experience is different because you are different. What do scientists do the most as experts of critical thinking and problem solving? They rely incredibly to compensate on empirical observations because they have to remind themselves their personal experience is exclusively different because they are in the statistical minority. So to compensate for that, they are in a profession of relying on something that is as far removed as their self-selection bias can happen. And that's what I did my entire life. But now I kind of want to like be in it. I want to be a goofball and take spontaneous decisions. And I can tell you, 4 years of doing that, I don't think I might have done it like twice. I celebrate those times I did it. Okay, so what is a thing that I recently shared? Joshing was here for this. I bought a dry eraser board that I didn't use for 6 months. And when I see it, I have to remind myself, no, it's not because I was not being pragmatic or rational about it, or, well, it's kind of all those things. But I also see it sitting in the corner as a reminder that I can make spontaneous choices. And they don't, it still lingers in my mind all the time because it's sitting in the corner and I left it in plain sight as a reminder of my lapse of judgment. But at the same time, I done it as a spur of the moment, and I don't do that very often. So you might be thinking buying a $5 like dry eraser board is trivial. Then you're not in the same mindset that I am in. Like, legitimately, my actions and stuff carry so much consequences that I wouldn't want to burden most people with the emotional instability that comes with even the finer tasks. So if you're ever wondering how deliberate I am when I talk about things, it's extremely deliberate. It's exhausting. It's not sustainable. If you're in that situation and you're always constantly hyper-focused on every little thing you did, take a breather, learn from someone who is closed-minded. Like, I know how that sounds. It can be very off-putting. It can be very unreceptive, but observe their behavior. Observe how they become happy. Balance yourself out. It is the idea. It appeals to the intellectual because it's challenging. It's challenging to be a non-compulsive person seeking to learn from a compulsive person. But those are the things that ultimately give you a route to create balance. Hey, I can spend those $5 on a meal. Yeah. Like, I still haven't used it. Okay, here's another one. I do have this, but I bought it way too early. I have a $500 tripod. I mean, its MSRP is $500. I saw the deal and I'm like, I should buy it now in case I don't get a chance when I want to use it, right? In this tube is a $500 tripod. And I still haven't used it, but I am going to use it in like less than a month. It's just I saw a great deal, was saving it, but I can tell you, until I use this thing, right? Until I use this thing, I don't get any value from it. So what could I have done with that money in the meantime, and then spaced it out, and then just make my returns, and then buy this then? Well, I had to be okay with that. I think the vast majority of people be like, oh, I'm going to use it, and then when they use it, it's like, see, I was right. That's not how I would interpret it. As an intellectual, I lost that $500 in value over the course of 6 months. I could bought something $100 or $200, make a return, make the difference in $300, make up another $500, and then buy it then. So don't be an optimizer. If you want to stay and find balance, in my opinion, and you feel like you're always constantly trying to find the best way to do things, we got to be okay with these things. In fact, sometimes collect something. Just buy something to collect. It can be, it's so off-putting at first, but it could go a long way to self-care. But anyways, just thought I share. You're probably never going to actually see this thing because it's gonna be the thing the recording device is gonna be on, but yeah. It took me 6 months to decide on the tripod that I wanted for like the rest of my life, because this has a lifetime warranty. But anyways, this is a tripod for life. So Yeah, 6 months to figure out what I want to buy for like the next 20 or 30 years of use. I think that's a fairly nice return on investment. Granted, okay, this is the end of the digression, but granted, if it falls apart after 1 year, you're gonna hear some long digressions about that. All right. Okay, I've digressed. Am I ever gonna get to the end of the review this game? I don't know at this rate. I don't know. We were playing all the tracks that I think I can do better in a reasonable amount of time twice today, and then we were gonna switch to Koromon, but I might go play them again both twice. They're relatively short. They're less than 2 minutes long, so perhaps that's my rationalization. Anyways, good digression. Thank you for the initial question or thought or statement, Worm. And yes, I think it's yes and no, of course, but it's a very important thing to keep in mind. The difference between the constant battle between seeking new information, having a mindset to seek new information, and being ignorant, and their association with emotional stability. For example, one of the greatest things about video games is if there was information to tell you you are statistically unlikely to be the best in the world, and not knowing it and working on it in the absolute ignorance of it, what type of balance would you strike for your emotional stability? Because for me, the younger you become, you can't unlearn statistically being meted against. So, blissful, youthful aspiration reaches its pinnacle of potential with ignorance, not with intellectual open-mindedness. Intellectual open-mindedness becomes an inherent pressure, obligation, and almost unbearable weight over time that lead to gross depression and burnout. So you gotta strike your compromise between the two. Are you able to handle that burden? As a young person that got capped by the system, I would have wanted to know. I would have wanted to know as a younger, but I didn't get to know. When I was a young guy, like when I was younger, I was a kid who didn't have the internet. I didn't know that my growth was capped by my circumstances, my resources. My parents tried to provide as much as they could, but I did not have the resources. So high school, I could have went to college when I was 14 or 13 even. Like high school was absolutely, there weren't very intellectual learning lessons. But would I give that up? No, I learned emotional lessons. So, but for the sake of the principle of the thing, I didn't need to go to middle school or high school. I wouldn't know that though. On the internet, it would be, if the internet was around, that's a whole different story. And now kids live in this context. They can't unknow things. So when you raise a child, where do you introduce them to the world? When do you introduce them to the world? Can they handle it? Like, it's a parent's, it's an adult's responsibility to a great extent to know that I hope my child is the one that knows, or these kids know that if they knew the statistical outliers and all that stuff, how does that impact their potential? How does that introduce emotional instability into their lives? As a product of Chinese culture, my parents, I literally knew this the moment I could comprehend what they were telling me. They have told me that there is someone better. So for me, I wanted to know that when I went to middle school and high school, I got capped. That's it would drive me to leave that cap. I would try to have gone to college way earlier in my life. But the thing is, I wouldn't trade it off for anything that led to me now. Because I wouldn't come to that realization. I wouldn't have my friends. I wouldn't be doing this, right? So, with all that said, there's a social experiment that you can look back on and how it informs you today. So I'm using these hypotheticals as a way to inform myself today and how I would try to embody myself as a youth, right? How would I feel if I was younger in that perspective, raised in this situation, in this environment? I would probably become any one of those numerous children's now, like kids growing up that tries to balance knowing that, yeah, you're probably not going to be the best, but you're going to try anyways. Before the internet, kids were just told they can be the best in anything they want, and they don't have evidence or anything telling them otherwise until they got older, when they already tried and failed and did their best in ignorance first. So it's a really different scape now. And I'm playing this game and I'm thinking the same thing. But I'm playing this game as a 30-year-old plus man that had an experience of understanding that I grew up with they're always knowing better, but the system capped me. That's the framework that I'm doing. So when some guy pulls up and says like they're going to be the best, I can relate to that and I can't relate to that. Because when I was in my 20s, I didn't know what I could do. I just know what I know how to do. The internet was not that big yet. I did not get to choose that. And I'm smiling because I know enough to know that if the internet did exist, I might have been lost too. Like, it's not like I can remember how I was, like, emotionally, how I approached things when I was younger. Because if I was thrown into the internet, would I stretch myself so thin that I go into a deeper depression at the age of 15 or something? Would I have burned triply as bright and not go into like a near mental breakdown in my 30s as opposed to like mentally break down like in my mid 20s? So that's how I relate to Zoomers and Alpha right now. I'm trying to take myself apart and think about the personalities, the mindset that I still have and hold with me, and I place myself in this context. I would be very close to the. I would, if I had to guess, yeah, I would probably end up being a content creator doing like bootstrapping things that are really, really great, but then by the age of 18 or 19, I want to retire already. And I lose my sight on life and close off and probably go into rehab and get some psychological evaluation because I probably couldn't handle how much I needed to do at the time. So break ignorance. Being an intellectual is not all sunshine and rainbows, in my opinion. You got to learn how to embrace your ignorance too and learn to compartmentalize a bit. I'm not choose when to compartmentalize when necessary. The more tools you have, the safer you can, the more dynamic you can be. But you learn those things, and then you get to choose to compartmentalize them. Is my opinion. Knowing how to gain control of learning when to turn it off and turn it on, because all the time, all the time, ones and zeros, you're gonna run out of fuel. And today I witnessed someone that is running out of fuel. And it was from a conversation I had with them yesterday. I want to be wrong. So in like a 2 or 3 years, that person is still doing the same thing they're doing, and they come to me and say they're perfectly happy. Absolutely, go for it, man. You're a superstar. I prefer that, but it only took like 10-ish minutes to understand that this person's gonna burn out really, really fast. Probably in another 6 months, that entire lifescape and outlook is gonna have to undergo some refinement to accommodate the new wall that they've encountered. I hope they have a great support system, like a loving parents, great friends, maybe even an extended community from their popularity that will give them a reassurance that it is okay to not have to burn like a star every single day, like all the moments of your life, and because you have a long life ahead of you. Sitting at the beach, taking in some rays, it'll go a long way, son. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not really okay. I feel like I'm talking to you. Like I know you. It feels like I'm describing you, son, but you are in that 1%. And I've been playing Osu, so we've been exposed to Osu, right? So you are in that 1%. So it resonates with that 1 or 2%. Until you do something that you know you're doing it and you're just being mediocre, right? Until you can do that, rarely would I say something that is relatable otherwise. Because I as a disclaimer, right? We talked about this before. I gravitate towards seeing problems and solving problems or looking at problems and patterns. I don't talk generally, I say very little about healthy things unless it is addressing those problems. So when I'm on stream, when I observe things, it's about bringing awareness to the non-sustainable lifestyles and mindsets, and then encouraging people to seek their supports and their guidance counselors and their psychologists and stuff to talk about the good things, the alternatives. So, and what I do is the alternative. So if someone watched me do something like play this game and I'm like, yeah, pretty mediocre, it's like, what are you doing? It's not productive. Why do you find being mediocre at something not productive? It's like, well, what you're seeing now is the best of me. I'm practicing something I'm not great at. And you might be saying, wait, you're not, how can you be bad at being bad? Like, you'd be very surprised if you have the same problems I do. If you don't think you have that same problem, you can tell me you don't understand, or you haven't reached that level of understanding. So there are two things. If you're an older person, that older person would not say that, generally speaking, due to experience, because they've experienced and lived long enough that they've reached a state. If you're a young person and you tell me, I always try my best, and it doesn't seem like I would ever quit on something I love, you are young, you're inexperienced, and those things are associated with negative things. Okay? It's okay to stop something you love and come back to something you love. That's regulation. That's moderation. But when you are young, man, burn as bright as you want. In my opinion, that's the life lesson. The life lesson is to burn and seize carpe diem and whatnot. However, in 5 or 10 years, revisit the 30-year-old me and see if I was right or not. If I was wrong, tell the 40-year-old me what was different. Because the 30-year-old me can't anticipate what the environment is going to be like in 10 years in which you develop this thing, which in my 10 years were a different environment. So I would love to know in another 10 years if I was right on the mark as I'm saying this. And I'm recording these things because I want to know if I was way off the mark or way on the mark. And both are great because it shows where I was, and I can explain and take that information, right? Well, here's the deal, right, son? A healthy individual has found the balance. So if you're imbalancing, like if you write on paper, how often are you in your desirable emotional state through your entire day? Map it out to a week, map it out to a month, however long you feel sufficient. And then ask yourself, are you overall in a better state, or the desirable state, or not? And then you can determine if you're healthy or not, right? And this deals with recording actively right now. So like as a social experiment, today you could start, just type in a number on a spreadsheet. I'm a 7. Tomorrow, I don't know, 4. And then you can even elaborate in the future. Singular noteworthy thing of why it's 4 or 7, or why it's above or below your threshold. And then in a month, look at it and then interpret it. If it's way on the south side, then yeah, you're unhealthy. You have not managed to empirically reach proper self-care that maintains an overall level of satisfaction. For now, you can't really tell, right? Because like it's a feel. You right now, if you say, like Joshing does it quite a bit, where he says, I feel crummy today, and then it end up being projected as I feel crummy every day, or I feel crummy very often. So sometimes short periods of consecutive awfulness can make it feel, I don't know if you're familiar with this saying, son, but time, there's this expression, time in the physical world moves the same no matter what. This isn't a saying, the exact saying, but this is my interpretation. Time in the physical world, according to physical law, moves linearly, and it's immutable. It's constant. Time is constant. But time for a person speeds up and slows down. So when you're in a series of negativeness, right? Like if you're depressed and it's consecutive, it may feel like it's longer than a period of success or period of neutral or indifference. So one can get into the habit of projecting and extending how actually long it is. It's kind of like asking, there are a lot of these psychological experiments. One of them is the perception of how often someone sleeps, how long someone sleeps. And notoriously, in most of the meta-analysis, most people underestimate how long they actually sleep. Like, it's a dramatic experiment. So that's just to present the psychological experiment. So how do you explain this? Like, why do they underestimate how much they sleep? So then they start talking about other things, like maybe it's the perceived quality of the sleep. Maybe it's a social trend or normalization. Like most people seem like they always lack sleep, so that's why that was like maybe a decade ago. It's actually more. It's like 2 decades ago or something, because the rising concern of electronics and all that stuff. And then it comes to this narrative. But feelings are highly unreliable, but they can really help with associating with facts. So for example, when you always feel like this is not right and you wrote down what the facts are, you can learn from yourself. It's like, oh, you just don't like this fact. And that's a great thing to learn about yourself. You get to learn like, oh, whenever you talk about this, it's bad. Can I just tell you that I don't really like this? But I you'll be able to the when you learn that, now you wonder, well, what about it is bad? And then you'll start going down a line of thought to help with understanding more about yourself. At least that's the theory, my theory, which is probably a lot of people's theories. It's just that's a personal one. At least that's how my personal experience. I don't know if I'm in the minority anymore when it comes to an imbalance of self-care. I'm not sure if that's a minority. Like being in the internet generation, like among the internet generation, the people who grew up with the internet, the thing I just said about an imbalance of self-care, I don't know if that's in the minority. In my generation, pre-internet, that is not the minority. That is the minority. Like, without a doubt, that is the minority. Nowadays, it's a little bit more nebulous. Because of the trending need for mental health and self-care and counteracting what our internet algorithms and overlords are projecting, I would say it's probably less so now than before. So there are far more people who are not, in my opinion, not given the tools for self-care, for proper self-care, because you have to grow up way fast. It's ironic. It's ironic to say this to an older generation who has not transitioned into the internet, but the internet accelerated people's intellectual nature. Even the most closed-minded individuals can close-mindedly be extremely well informed at an incredible pace, and that ages a person, not through experience. It's they age through, they incredibly accelerate the perceived age of a person without experience. You do not require to systematically gain the experience and its complexities and its trade-offs and stuff by engaging in the activity, but you've aged incredibly disproportionately with knowledge. That's kind of like that kid that realized that the greatest athlete in the world are a freak of nature, and you decided you wanted to be an athlete in that same sport. You've mentally aged like 30 to 40 years, but your body is still a young sprout wanting to still engage in it. And you're going to spend all your time doing that, knowing the 20 or 30-year-old knowledge that's already there. A lot of, back in the day before the internet, the kids play sports to aspire to be the best of themselves, like to be best of their nearest neighbor, not to know that there's someone who's younger than you and already better than you. That's I don't think based on the outcome and how frequently this happens, I don't think the majority of people can handle that, like at a young age. At an older age, maybe with some like living and growing pains and the realization of failure and like the inevitableness of things you can't do and can do, before they come to that realization, perhaps. If there's a timing for everyone, like the dependency of when that timing is, it's malleable because humans have different tolerance levels. But the ones that are ailing, the ones that I see that are ailing, probably learned too soon. Yeah, so maybe too soon. I can say that too, but it doesn't make me feel bad, or it doesn't produce ambivalence, right? I can think of multitudes of ways of offsetting what I'm trading off for not being the best. However, if you learn too soon, where your motivations and stuff are not diversified yet, like your value is attached to that one thing or a few things, it can be crippling. It can be very crippling. It almost feels pointless at times. Obviously, I don't think I'm not asserting that you think that. I'm saying to come to the realization that it isn't pointless. It's about you. You know, what you're doing is about you, not about that person, that imaginary gold standard, or not imaginary gold standard, but that gold standard. It's their gold standard to deal with, and they are trading off stuff too. So they are making trade-offs too. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. Everyone has a tolerance, you know, like it's yes, it depends. It always depends. But what can be said is timing of information. And it's going to be rough in the future because it's in your face. It's in your face. There's no disclaimers of what this information can do to young, impressionable minds. Not yet. Not yet, anyways. The United States is answering this question right now. Like, on the upper echelon of politics, they're answering, how do we find a workable compromising system that balances when to expose someone to information that they will eventually learn or get. Just how soon, how do we still give them the choice of saying, hey, you know, how are you feeling about yourself today? What do you know about this thing? Okay, so the video you're about to watch could have certain consequences. And we like to know or somehow measure if you're okay with it at the moment, right? Instead of just voluntarily just shunting it up into your face and normalizing it. So that's kind of the compromise. That's a compromising thing. Actually, it's more reductive at the top because they have to think about how to execute it, make it easier. So it's what things should we not show young people at an arbitrary average age, so most of them will win out, that we should not show, and then what stuff should show, and then or put a disclaimer or a wall and make it inconvenient so they don't see it most of the time. You might be thinking like, oh, parental controls and stuff, they never work, kids get around it. It's not really, that's not technically the approach of it. It's just to make it inconvenience enough that you won't even bother doing it anymore. Like it's enough inconvenience. How much of an inconvenience to get overall the average people to not do something or to do something voluntarily, right? So there's going to be some arbitrary thing and maybe save more than half the kids from completely opening their entire perspective of their lives when they couldn't even experience the life yet. That's kind of how I feel. And I just saw that today. I just saw that. And I just had a conversation with that person yesterday. And I was completely ignorant, obviously, of where or what they are. It's just my deduction was that, and my suspicions were correct. And I hope in the next 6 months or a year, that person is still healthy and like not hating themselves and constantly yelling at themselves and stuff. And that's, I only spectated for 5 to 10 minutes and I already saw the patterns, and it sucks. Personally, I think it sucks. I don't think it's in my right to interfere or anything. It's just, it sucks to see another extraordinary shining person who the only thing that comes out of their mouths is self-criticism, because their standards are so unbelievably unnecessarily high, in my opinion, non-sustainably high. Oh, sorry, that was a long digression, but when I play games are one of the vehicles to this. It's part of the responsibility, and I don't know if that's going to change. Games are such a integral life coping mechanism now that they inherently normalize things. And knowing that Fortnite, Apex Legend and stuff, I'm not saying they can't be successful and stuff, but there's no disclaimers, there's no like reinforcement or like okay or fun, or like there aren't feedbacks or infrastructures to say, hey, stop being addicted to trying to being the best. We're capitalizing on that. That's what makes our games. And I'm not trying to moral grandstand, or I'm sort of kind of as an adult or someone who like wants kids to be like a feedback where, hey, I'm playing this game, it makes me happy, they continue to play this game to make them happy, but it's not due to the designers emphasizing healthy self-care. It's designers incredibly incentivizing the unsustainable goal of the game. And is that fair to hold developers and publishers accountable for that? No, it's not fair. It's only rational because that's what they specialize in. They specialize in making a game successful. That's their goal. But as a person looking on the outside who really has a hand in self-care, games I could maybe ambivalently say it's ultimately unhealthy. However, it's not unhealthy in the way that most people think. The whole wasting time thing, that's just a superficial thing. It's not the source, in my opinion. Like the whole distracting yourself from productivity and whatnot, that's not the case. Games are very productive. However way. Games are relentless. They don't hold your hands. They don't tell you if you fail, it doesn't just destroy your self-esteem over and over again. The way the game is designed is not of learning process. It's of self-motivated competitive process. It's a cutthroat thing. So what does that resemble? That resembles business. So in fact, here's one last thing to take away. My biggest hot take, my biggest conspiracy theory. The newer generation are overestimating how good they are with business, but at the same time, the whole competitive nature in game design is business. So, level with me here. I don't doubt that anyone who plays video games have some say or perception of business models and what is lucrative. But you have to know that conditioning doesn't come from your personal experience educated in business. You have to know that the games themselves reflect the business culture. It reflects the job culture. It reflects academia. Games have become life. Like you might think of microtransactions, like what is microtransactions? Every time you get up and spend 2 hours playing a game, that's a microtransaction. You just don't think of it that way because you're thinking about it in terms of money. Every time you spend an hour playing money, how much can you make? That's a microtransaction. You don't like games. Well, that's what detaching from games mean, right? You're taking a break from the business model. But the thing is, Josh, you're in a way, what I'm trying to say is you're substituting one for the other now. Games are designed in a way that they're cutthroat. They're a reflection of real life now. They're no longer an escapism. The things you like the kids that like games these days can make exceptionally successful people in any of the tasks that are outside of games, because the game's philosophies, the popular game philosophies, milk the exact motivation and philosophy and mindset that makes successful people successful. It's just it was channeled into video games first. I escape from games because I'm coping, and it's just the real life because they're the same. Yeah, they are. That's what I'm. So games used to not be like this. Games used to not be inundated, cutthroat, and compete with each other. Joshing, like they're not there to be treated as business, microtransactions, pre-ordering, methodical, manufactured, but that's how you approach jobs. That's how you approach education. That's how you compete with each other. So all the popular things harness the same mindsets and personalities, only now it's channeled into video games. Like, so when you normalize video games, inherently, actually, you can be very competitive in everything else. It is very transcribable, but is the game teaching you that? Is the game telling you, hey, what you learn here, all the motivation learned here, you can do that with pretty much anything else. Games are not here to educate you in a way school is, because there's no human component that's actively doing that. It's a developer's perspective on normalizing it so that it is consumable. So no, I don't expect developers to have an education in psychology and all that stuff. That's their expertise. They don't have time. Like it would be unreasonable to do all that. But hey, here's a hot take. What if developers hired a psychologist? And I mean, I know it's a little money and stuff, but accessibility has become a forefront. Just so you know, I'm not saying the gaming industry is not doing anything about this. It's actually the opposite. Some of the bigger companies now, Josh, and where there are other companies now, one of the top priorities, one of the biggest shifts in the industry is the advertisement of accessibility in video games. And accessibility is not a far cry from utilizing video games to teach life lessons, like extending to life lessons. Like, what am I saying that's different from a video game? To Sun, for example, the idea to make life and tasks that you dislike by context, you dislike the context of it, is to extrapolate what you do for video games and make it in the context of real life. Because the philosophy behind video game building and community building in video games are no longer that much different from any other task. You have to integrate into a community. You have to belong to the community, learn how to communicate in that community, observe objectively, and have personal opinions about it, and compete in a cutthroat way on a skill that's really refined, and there's no pity party when you fail. What does that sound like? That sound like Western cutthroat job hunting or anything. That sounds like skill development. That sounds like skill artisanship. So maybe in the future is different, but nowadays the biggest hot take I can say is you are not escaping your life to play video games. Video games are pretty much reminding you of real life. So that sucks. If your real life isn't going well, like your self-care isn't going well, and you go to video games, it's just going to remind you of how inadequate you are. And it doesn't help that all the influencers and all the other people and kids and stuff are reinforcing that. That's the point. That is the absolute point. You just highlighted the point. That is the perspective that am saying because they don't see it that way. This is the hot take. I'm not saying what everyone wants to say or hear. It wouldn't be interesting. Like, I'm not saying what you want to hear or what you're compelled to hear. I didn't say literally that's what people are thinking about. I'm saying that's what I'm thinking about. I am interpreting something that is outside of what everyone's living in. I am outside of a system and observing in. If you are in the system and you participate in the system, it's really difficult to make an observation about it. So like when someone's outside of me, like outside of this, they don't play video games, they don't stream, they don't look for content, they can make another observation on me as another subgroup on top of the subgroup I'm talking about. So it's not nobody, but some people, right? Because I'm part of the group. So like if someone stands outside of me, right? So your group doesn't include me. My group includes people like me and your group. And then someone on the outside will see that when I tell them nobody says that, that means my group includes yours and my group. But to them, it's not nobody because they're looking out on in. So that's highlights exactly what I mean. The vast majority of people are experiencing this. They just don't see it in a way that I see it and the way they see it. I see it the way you see it just now based on what you said because I'm standing on the outside. I'm not living it either. When I play a video game, I don't want to bring my real life cutthroat competitiveness into a video game, but the video game is designed that way. It harnesses the targeted audience's motivation and compassion and willingness to find value in themselves. That's how you get kids to buy your game and stick with your game. It becomes their job to be good. And as an adult, I have to appreciate that you guys are working really hard. Someone can work really hard in a video game because that's the first thing they fell in love with. It's taking the advantage, it's opportunism from people outside to monetize kids' predilections and then utilize their passion that otherwise deviate to something else. For me, my passion deviated to science. I still burned the same way. Like I burned crazy, thought I was going to be super great, one of the best, go to the best university. I did go to one of the best universities, but then I burned out. And what does that sound like? Well, it could have been anything. I could have wanted to do underwater basket weaving if there was a competitive nature about it and a market for it. Now there's a market for games. There's a market for being good at games. There's a market for being a good content creator that make games and be good at those games. It can be a job. So what happened? It's a job. A game now represents an opportunity to be a job, a career. Before my time, that was not an option. If I were born in this time, would I consider it as an option? Absolutely. What am I doing right now? Of course, I would. Absolutely. But I'm taking myself out of my time. And yeah, I'm an older guy who lives outside the system, looking in and admit exactly. I would not say it the way I say it because in my mind as a kid, I would think like what you just thought about just now. Absolutely. Like, because most of the people and you probably, I'm not suggesting that I know for a fact, didn't go through 4 or 5 jobs, found out they kind of sucked, quit some of them, use them as life experience, go through 7 years to get another job, do that, quit that, come here and talk about it. So I you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you had multiple jobs. So in order for someone to have a perspective like me, you have to go through 5 or 7 jobs, have 3 career pivots, and understand that before you can make a perspective check on that. The vast majority of the people I'm talking about are nowhere near, they didn't even live long enough for that to happen. So it's kind of safe. Wait, you don't even have one yet? Are you that young still? and and I'm saying I don't think you it's crazy. Like I don't know what to do as an adult. Like if I had a child, right? I don't really know what to say to the younger person. Like, oh, I know you love this game so much, but you're literally treating it like a job now. Because when you go get a job, it's going to feel like that, only it's not as good as the video game. How are you going to do both? Like, how am I going to convince you as an adult to do both? It's going to be hard. You have to give one up. Like, give up the thing that you like, that you can do and practically can get a job, and not get a job that is sustainable. And it's crazy. Like, I don't have a solution, but I'm trying to think of one, or I'm trying to bridge one or something. Because man, if in like 2 or 3 years, if I ever want to have a child, that's gonna be front and center. Like, I understand there's all the biological requirements and stuff and all that, but that seems so much more in line than trying to figure out the emotional and intellectual balance of a child now. Like, I don't see, as a prospective like parent in the future, right? I don't see younger people as someone I don't care about, because younger people treat other younger people like that. But as an older person, seeing younger people struggling with this, it's a nightmare, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm not trying to represent adults that just wing it and live up to the moment. I'm a planning kind of person, and it's rough thinking what to do. And I have a few streamers. Hey, I follow a few streamers for over maybe like 10 years now. They have children. They did have children, and those kids are growing up and they're like going through their thing, and I'm observing that. Like, I'm curious. Like, I really want to hear. It would be great to have a conversation like, what's your thought process in all this? Like, these people are literally going to expose, like, by association, they are going to be exposed. Their children are going to be either directly or indirectly. And the two really great father figures now that I know, they've integrated it. Like, they're not like secluding or isolating their child from the livelihood of what they do. I mean, my parents did that, and they work in a restaurant 24/7. Like, it's so this isn't something unique before the internet, but it is still something to consider, because the internet is another monster, right? Instead of getting the real life, like being in a 100-degree Fahrenheit, that's like 37 degrees Celsius, work environment for like half the year, and then the other half the year is like, yeah, it's moderately okay, non-stop working every single day. Is that cruel? Is that crazier to scare you and get to work and stuff than a motivator than, I don't know, throwing a kid into the cutthroat environment of competitive gaming? I have no idea. One, I can tell you, is absolutely emotionally equally as destructive as the other. Like, my parents have often constantly said, we want you to do well in school. We want you to be easier. Don't be slaving away like in 100 degree or 37 degrees Celsius, restaurant with no AC and doing takeout and bending over backwards, doing anything possible to make as much money as possible, being underappreciated. That's kind of their take. Is I don't you see how much we're arguing and suffering? This is what we don't want for you. And that was my mental like challenge and stuff to encourage me to do better in school and all that stuff. Now the new kids are, hey, as parents, I don't even have to do that. Like, you know, like as adults, it's like I don't even need to do that. Just go on the internet. Here, you see this incredible person? Be more incredible than that. Like, I'm honestly, I think that's even more emotionally damaging. From my perspective, like if I imagine my younger self, I would be even more devastated, but at the same time, incredibly motivated. Like devastated and motivated at the same time. My feelings would be so confused. I'd be like, nah, I got this. Somewhere I keep hope, and then, but I already know that I'm so far behind. Ooh. I learned that when I was in 20, by the way. In my 20s, I became really started alarmingly becoming aware that I was a big fish in a small pond. And then I started, in my 20s, I started developing some slight regrets about, I had to go over a phase where I felt regret, like, man, I could have spent 2 or 3 years working on my pre-med education, then working on MCATs. I could have gotten a MD, PhD program. And then by the time I got to graduate school, it's like, all that's changed. It was, I had to cope, dynamically understand things, and stability came along with that. But that's where I'm truncating like 12 years of experience. It started with coping. Yeah. It started with the need to cope, but that coping mechanism became a lifestyle, and that lifestyle brought other things, and now it no longer feels like coping, right? I cope with new things, but not those things. Once something becomes habit forming in a sustainable lifestyle, it more merges into the continuum of healthy living and not coping. I still cope with certain things that are very different for someone. I have mania. I have intrusive thoughts. That's not something that I like to believe the most majority of kids nowadays still don't contend with. And if you don't understand what that is, I'm glad you don't understand what that is. Intrusive thoughts are non-voluntary. You don't get to just choose to like forget about it and stuff. You don't get to choose. You can try your best to maybe like prevent it from happening ever, but I don't really know what that is other than not putting myself in a situation like that or something. But you can't control everything. So it's non-voluntary. There are things that are non-voluntary, and that requires coping. So most of the stuff that are outside my control, I still exercise coping mechanisms. I keep developing and figuring out more sustainable ways to cope with them. But aspirations, motivations, feelings, pride, self-esteem, lots of emotional stuff, yeah, they used to be coping things because I needed to cope with them to be an intellectual, in my opinion. Like, to be intellectually comfortable with being open-minded, you have to be emotionally stable. If you're not emotionally stable, you're not ready to handle it. What is the first thing that happens when a closed-minded person gets challenged by an open-minded person? They get personal. They have to be really emotionally stable to be willing to take advice, criticism, peer review, get out of the box. So ask yourself if you're emotionally stable enough to expose yourself. Intrusive thoughts are scary. Can't stop thinking about how some thoughts will catch me in an unstable. Yeah, dude. Okay, this is gonna be very real, and I don't want to tell you that this is happening now. I'm not suggesting it happens now. When I was still working, I had to commute. It's not a really long commute. It's like a 2-hour drive between where I used to do research and my family home, the very home that I'm in right now, the house. And in that 2-hour drive, I had an intrusive thought just to drive off a bridge. That's very real. So it's no longer the case, but that's what I mean by intrusive thoughts. You can be like, hey, I'm driving home for Thanksgiving, like this is great. American Thanksgiving, sorry. Like I'm gonna have like four weeks, you know, like, or 4 days of just relaxing and stuff. It's like, well, you know, I'm on a bridge. Like this is a really long bridge. That doesn't look like great guardrails. What happens if I just drive off the road, like drive off the bridge right now? That's what I mean by intrusive thoughts. Um, it might not necessarily mean you're unhealthy or something. It just comes to you. Like the thoughts are intrusive. There's no really, you're not trying to rationalize it. The more you try to rationalize it, the more dominance it takes over you. So acting on them it's incredible. So coping would be, hey, you know, this is not, what is the first habit you associate with? It's like, wait, this is a random thought. You're okay, you're happy, you're fine with your life. Like those are the coping mechanisms that you immediately learn to do so that you don't do something that you will utterly regret in the moment. So that's kind of a really serious version of intrusive thoughts, but it can happen. And because it happened to me when I was younger, and sometimes it does still, like I still have intrusive thoughts quite a bit, but they're not as extreme. I can only imagine what it's like when you're a teenager or in early 20s, constantly under the pressure and inundated with information to self-perform. I can only imagine how much an intrusive thought can be enabled right away. Like if it does happen, it's like, oh, what the heck? Let's just do it, right? Like YOLO. I can imagine that could be very provocative one day, to the point where they could make life changing, not for better or for worse. I mean, could possibly be for worse actions. So I'm always constantly cognizant of that, because I still have intrusive thoughts to this day. Probably far more regularly than a healthy individual. And I like to believe most older people are healthy. And there are still more older people than 20s and younger people on this planet. I imagine those people don't experience this as much. But I worry about where our current state of affairs for the younger generation. But yeah, that's a good example. Anyways, I've digressed pretty much the whole time here, but we'll play a little bit. Just a little bit. Younger people are so... I do feel like that's a common thing, though. I had a friend who told me it was very frequent for her to want to bite people for... That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. And also, we have to keep in mind, Worm, that we also live in different countries, and then we have different cultural backgrounds. So the limitations of my perspective and statistics tend to be American culture dominant in a Western society. So like we have, you know, distances and like personal various things. But yeah, it is common enough. I think it's common enough to be concerned. And that's why I'm concerned about it. It is common. Why do I want to bite people? Listen. One time I just wanted to bite myself. Like I like that's real. That's very real. Like one time I just thought, like, you know, I looked at my hand. I just wanted to We're not thinking about biting. Let's